is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Paul Barber.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. EU foreign ministers agree tough new sanctions on Belarus, promising that they're going to hurt.
Sweden seeks a new government after Prime Minister Stefan Löfven is ousted in a no-confidence vote.
Bad news for President Macron and for far-right leader Marine Le Pen as French regional elections see the revival of the traditional right.
And COVID strikes the Euros again, sending Scotland's man of the match, Billy Gilmour, off the pitch.
EU foreign ministers have approved sweeping new measures against Belarus after last month's forced landing of a passenger plane.
Meeting in Luxembourg, they signed off on sanctions targeting key sectors of the Belarusian economy, as well as individuals, all aimed at increasing the pressure on President Lukashenko. Let's head over to Brussels now, and Tony Waterman. What's the latest, Tony?
Well, Paul, this latest raft of sanctions targets 78 individuals and 8 entities that the EU believes are linked to President Lukashenko's repression of democracy and violation of human rights, really since last August's presidential election, which was widely seen as fraudulent. On this list include judges and ministers, and 7 of the individuals are believed to be linked to that forced grounding of the Ryanair flight, which led to the arrest of dissident journalist Roman Petrovic and also his girlfriend, including the transport and defense ministers. All of these individuals have now been hit with travel bans and asset freezes, and including some very prominent business figures who are believed to have received support or have benefited from the Lukashenko regime. Ministers have also readied economic sanctions, which the foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, says are meant to hurt the economy. These are really going to be targeting major revenue sources, so things like the financial sector, perhaps a ban on new loans or an end to EU export credits. The potash industry, which is a component of fertilizer, and actually Belarus is a major exporter of this, the tobacco industry, the petrochemical industry. The list is actually quite long, and we are expecting that EU leaders, when they meet here in Brussels on Thursday, are going to give their backing for these economic sanctions. But this is now the 4th round of sanctions that the EU has imposed in less than a year, all of it aimed at trying to change behavior. Take a listen.
Sanctions is a way of putting pressure on the government of Belarus, and these are going to hurt. They're going to hurt the economy of Belarus heavily.
Lukashenko must understand that these will not be the last sanctions to be agreed.
And Tony, the ministers also met with Belarus opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. Did anything come out of that?
Yes, this whole meeting today kicked off with a working breakfast with the opposition figure who does believe that she won that August elections. She said that sanctions are not a silver bullet, but they could help to end the violence and get people out of prison. But she is really calling on Europe to be even tougher with their sanctions. She presented the ministers with a list of state-owned enterprises that she said are supporting the Lukashenko regime. She would like to also see those sanctioned. And as you heard from Josep Borrell himself, this could potentially not even be the last. In the press conference right now, he said this could not be the last round of sanctions. There could be another round of sanctions. But this tactic of really targeting the inner circle, the support network of the Lukashenko regime, is something that the opposition movement has been calling for quite a while now, because they believe that if these individuals who are financially disabled or are not able to travel or get their money out of certain places are hit, then perhaps they would be less loyal to the Lukashenko regime and therefore apply pressure to him to change his tactics.
And Tony, these sanctions are not just coming now from the EU, are they, but with coordination with other Western allies?
Yeah, you're right. This includes coordination with the UK, Canada, and the United States. They have also impose sanctions on dozens of individuals, really trying to get the maximum effect here from these sanctions. Part of this, though, is actually aimed at Russia. Russia, the Kremlin, President Putin, they are the main support system outside of Belarus for the regime. Lukashenko has met multiple times with President Putin in the last year for support, financial support, military support. And the thought there is that if the Lukashenko regime is run dry and has to depend on Russia even more, then perhaps that would sort of disgruntle the relationship in some way and force change on that side as well. So you see really this multi-pronged approach. But the Russia issue in Belarus is obviously something that was brought up in NATO last week. It was something that U.S. President Joe Biden spoke to President Putin about when they met in Geneva last week. And really, the Western alliance sees Russia as the biggest threat at the moment. So applying pressure to Russia, they're hoping will also apply pressure to Belarus.
OK, thanks very much, Tony. Tony Waterman in Brussels.
Stefan Löfven has just earned an unwanted place in the Swedish history books by becoming the first Prime Minister ever ousted in a no-confidence vote. So, what went wrong? Andrew Wilson finds out.
Since 2018, Sweden's been caught in an almost equal parliamentary balance between left and right, and Prime Minister Stefan Löfven has paid for that with his job. He must now resign and either create a vacancy or call an election. His position is the result of a small far-left party in his Social Democrat coalition withdrawing its support over plans to ease rent controls on new apartment buildings. The no-confidence vote in Parliament was decisive.
181 ja, 109 nej.
181, well over the 175 required to pass the motion. After the vote, the leader of the opposition denounced the government as harmful and historically weak, saying it should never have come to power. But at a news conference last week, Löfven rejected this process as risky for the country.
Det är nu en farlig väg.
It's a dangerous path that the Left Party, together with the right-wing Conservative parties, are now choosing, he said, especially since these four parties aren't in agreement about the matter at hand or have a common plan for Sweden for the future. For 3 years, Sweden's lived under such divided coalition politics. The challenges of organised crime, gun violence, immigration and the pandemic have all weighed heavily here. Even if they're called to vote in a snap election this year, Swedes face another general election scheduled for September 2022. Löfven is the first Swedish Prime Minister to be ousted like this. He built a clever coalition, but ended up alone. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
Neither the party of French President Emmanuel Macron or far-right leader Marine Le Pen fared well in the first round of French regional elections, which were held on Sunday. The polls, which saw a high percentage of people abstain from voting, come less than a year before the two are likely to face each other in a presidential election. Earlier, James Shields, Professor of French Politics at the University of Warwick, ran through the winners and losers.
One of the keys to this first round of voting has been the extraordinarily high abstention rate. And that abstention rate appears to have affected Le Pen's party most of all, and Macron's next. Something like 73%, according to a recent poll just out, of Le Pen's voters from 2017 didn't vote yesterday. So almost 3/4 of Le Pen's support base from 4 years ago didn't turn up yesterday. 60% of Macron's are estimated not to have turned up yesterday. So they've been hardest hit by this record abstention rate.
So why are people so disengaged, do you think?
I think there are several reasons. One, there's a long-term trend in France of voters disengaging from traditional politics, a trend that goes back years and even decades, in fact. Then there's the timing of these elections, with France just emerging from COVID restrictions. And there's the nature of the elections too. These elections lack a strong connection with voters. They have many unknown candidates. They're very unlike, say, the very local elections that France also has, the municipal, the town elections and the cantonal small-scale elections. They're very unlike those municipal elections. And they're unlike the very personal election that is the presidential election. So at the top you have a highly personalized election, the president for the presidency. At the bottom you have a very local election in the municipalities, and in between are these awkward layers of regional and departmental. And a lot of French people aren't even very clear what these levels of governance do.
And you mentioned the presidential elections. These polls perhaps especially significant this time around because they're unusually close to those presidential elections taking place next year.
Yes, they are unusually close. There's never been a regional election as close to a presidential election. And this has quite an effect because it makes an essentially local election. It gives it a national dimension. First, as a referendum on the Macron presidency. Second, as a barometer of the public mood after more than a year of COVID crisis. And third, I think, as an opportunity for some presidential hopefuls to strengthen their regional base as a launch pad for a presidential bid next year. As polling stands, Macron and Le Pen look set to rerun their contest of 2017. But there are some big figures in regional politics who, with a strong performance now, could put themselves in the frame as presidential candidates. Le Pen's party has never come to power in any region. It has governed a number of towns only. Far from coming first in 6 regions, as had been predicted, the RN, her party, is marginally ahead in just 1. That's the Southern Provençal Côte d'Azur. Now, were it to win that region, that would give Le Pen and her party a region of 5 million inhabitants to govern with a budget of several billion euros. Conversely, if her party fails to take the region next weekend, it will be seen as failure and a real setback to her presidential prospects.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, supermarket sweep. A bidding war could be on the cards for one of Britain's biggest grocery chains.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire. To bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back. Chief executives of the biggest airlines in the world have been discussing a way out of the pandemic slump. The industry's been one of the worst affected by national lockdowns and quarantine rules. Budget carrier Wizz Air says it's hoping to recover within the next 6 to 12 months. CGTN's Ross Cullen has been following the story for us from Paris. Hello to you, Ross. Tell us, what have the CEOs been saying?
Robin, the Paris Air Forum is usually a space for chief executives of airlines, airport representatives, to talk about the state of the industry in normal times, green policy, improvements, new terminals, new planes, different designs, new technologies all coming on stream. This year, the conversation was dominated by COVID-19. 18 months now of this pandemic, a year and a half of travel disruption and travel restrictions impacting the airline industry at a greater level, and there were discussions on how to combat the travel restrictions. They're the main issue for airlines at the moment, how to plan their recovery for the second half of the year based on which passengers might be able to start travelling domestically, travelling internationally, because these traffic lights that we have, the red, amber and green lists, differ from country to country depending on which nationalities are trying to go from which nation to which nation coming in, if there's quarantine, if there's isolation. And so they really are hurting the industry, and they're trying to plan for that. That is what some of the debates we saw today were focused around. We also did hear from some big names in the industry. Willie Walsh was one of them, formerly the boss of BA and Iberia, the British and Spanish flag carriers, now head of the International Air Transport Association, IATA. He was talking about infrastructure of airports, saying that some of them are just not ready for these big queues, having to keep people apart, space, social distancing, sanitising their hands. That infrastructure is really taking a lot of effort in airports, and we can hear now a little bit more of what Willie Walsh had to say.
Our estimate is that at peak times you could have up to 8 hours of going through processes at the airport, both departure and arrival, if you add it all up. And that would compare at peak times normally of less than an hour and a half. So you can see that, airports have not been designed, modern airports are not designed for every customer to go to a check-in counter. So we have to be able to provide a digital solution.
So some of those digital solutions, Robin, you might have seen in the past as well already coming on board, using your phone, QR codes to scan in and scan out at the ticket desks, with airport staff no longer physically handling your ticket. Those digital solutions were called for also by the chief executive of Qatar Airways. We heard from him as well. He was describing the overall impact on the industry, and you mentioned it as well, so badly hit by the economic crisis provoked by the pandemic. Whole airlines having to park their fleets. We did see, particularly in 2020, those airports which were closed, just used as a giant parking lot for aircraft, and the impact on airports as well and all the staff, and also downstream as well, catering, duty-free, engineering and maintenance, really all sorts of different secondary sectors impacted by the closure and the impact on travel. And so, listening a bit more to Akbar Al-Bakr, the chief executive of Qatar Airways, he said that digital solutions are one area that we need to focus on, but also there are some signs of positivity on the horizon.
All the major airlines in the world can only survive if they can operate through a hub which gives them connectivity and the volume of passengers they require. So I think that the requirement for travel by people is there, the demand is there, it's only the government restrictions that is impeding that growth. But I don't think that the hubs in the Gulf will be affected in any time.
What we saw this time last year in many nations in Europe, June 2020, opening up after the first lockdown, the mass mixing and movement of people, and then having to close down again in autumn after the end of the summer when the second wave of infections was confirmed. What European nations are hoping for this time around is the safe travel, the safe resumption of airline mixing and mass movement of people who have been vaccinated. That's the difference this time around, although I do have some bad news for you, Robin. Listening to one of the chief executives earlier, he predicted that we could still be wearing face masks on board planes until at least 2024.
OK, Ross, many thanks. Ross Cullen there in Paris.
It's another difficult week for cryptocurrencies, with Bitcoin tumbling as much as 10%. The drop comes amid a growing crackdown on cryptos in China. Authorities in the southwest province of Sichuan have ordered Bitcoin mining projects there to close, following similar practices in 2 other regions. On Monday, China's central bank again told the country's financial institutions not to provide any crypto-related services.
Amazon workers in Germany are about to begin a 48-hour strike to coincide with the retailer's Prime Day promotion. Unions say it's part of a long-running battle over better pay and working conditions. Germany is Amazon's biggest market outside the US. 10 days ago, the company vowed to raise entry-level pay in Germany to $15 an hour.
Shares in the British supermarket Morrisons jumped more than 30% in London. Investors think American private equity firm CD&R might launch a revised offer to buy the company. Morrisons says it's already turned down an offer worth more than $7 billion.
Fast food chain McDonald's says it will open 15 new outlets in the UK and Ireland over the next 12 months. At the same time, the company says it's hiring another 20,000 workers. It said the expansion plans and recruitment drive were in anticipation of a loosening of lockdown rules, which would allow greater capacity in its branches.
The COVID-19 pandemic has taken a severe toll on global investment flows. The UN's trade body, UNCTAD, says that global foreign direct investment shrank by a third last year. At $1 trillion, it's the lowest point ever seen, even since before the global financial crisis more than a decade ago. Well, earlier I asked James Zhang from UNCTAD about the key findings of this annual investment report.
For developed countries, FDI flows to EU fell by 37%. To a historical low level. The flow to the United States declined by 40%, that reached $156 billion. Interestingly, flows to developing Asia were resilient, and FDI flows to China rose by 6%, for example, that reached $149 billion, again, historically high. And this is mainly because of the resilience of economic growth. In Africa, FDI flows declined by 16% to $40 billion, and that's the level last seen 15 years ago. That is the current situation we see, or we see the impact of global FDI flows. But the prospects is I would say we're cautiously optimistic.
Cautiously optimistic. When are you predicting a full recovery to actually begin?
I would say that for 2021, there will be a kind of bottom out with modest regain of the lost ground of 2020. We expect a kind of 10 to 15% of increase this year, but it's still well below the level of 2019. Therefore, we've seen that global FDI flows will gain momentum of growth in 2022 and approaching a full recovery by then. And from onwards, there could be a momentum of further growth. This is not surprising, and normally the FDI cycle is lagging the general business cycle or economic growth cycle. So we have seen that the world economy and world trade are now recovering, and it'll be kind of a V-shaped recovering. But for global FDI, it could be kind of a U-shaped recovery, and that recovery is kind of gradual, as I said, over 2 years.
Finally, you mentioned China having very strong incoming FDI last year, and you're saying that Asian economies will see modest increases this year. Is that the case for China? Will things continue to be positive for China?
Yes, Paul, it's also for China a similar case. And we saw that last year China did very well, and it was one of the very few countries that FDI increased, and for China it rose by 6%. That's quite impressive during this pandemic, and that's because of the resilience of the economic growth and supported by investment facilitation efforts and the continued investment liberalization. So this we see it will continue, that the country is still attracting a large amount of investment. So for this year, next year, I would say it'll be kind of a steady, modest increase. So FDI will remain at a high level.
Stock markets in New York have rebounded after a week that saw the Dow Jones close at its lowest point since last October. The leading index was up 0.8% in early trading, with blue-chip bank and energy stocks leading the way. Last week saw sharp sell-offs, with investors worried over hints from the Federal Reserve that interest rates may be on the way back up sooner than had been expected. Let's go live now to New York and join John Terrett. Hello to you, John. So the markets have just had their worst week since October. What's been going on?
Well, you know, Robin and Paul, this is a remarkable story because today they're having their best day since October, which I'll get to in just a second. Look, you have to understand the entire conversation in Washington, D.C. and here on Wall Street is about inflation. Is it going to be transitory, which means temporary, or is it going to be transformational, in which case we all have to get used to it for many years ahead? Last Wednesday, I reported on the program that the Federal Reserve, the central bank, had decided to move up to the back end of 2023, the date when they plan to raise interest rates for the first time after the COVID outbreak to calm down inflation. And they also said that they thought inflation might be a bit more persistent than they had previously thought, raising eyebrows. People going, oh, really? Do they really know what they're talking about? Anyway, things were okay until we got to Friday. And on Friday, the president of the St. Louis and Missouri branch of the Federal Reserve, a man called James Bullard, who you haven't heard of and I hadn't really heard of before, comes out and on a television interview says, well, I think we have to raise interest rates much sooner than that, 2022. So the markets are going, really? Did he just say that? Seriously? And they sold off massively. We had the Dow down 533 points, or 1.6%, which is not that much. But there was a lot of red on the screen. Worst day since October. Now we come to today, the best day since October. The markets were worried then about inflation talk catching fire. Now, later this week, Jerome Powell, the chairman of the central bank, will testify to committees on Capitol Hill, probably virtually. And he's going to be asked about this inflation thing time and time again. And let me simplify for you, because it's really very easy. This is not really about inflation or interest rates rise. It's not really about that. What it is about is, has the Federal Reserve lost control of the inflation argument? Do they know what they're talking about? Now, James Bullard did not help that on Friday, which is why we had the big sell-off. And now I guess people have thought about it over the weekend. They've scratched their heads. We're having the best day since October, led by American Express, Caterpillar and Chevron. The Dow is up 1.5%, which is 508 points. Robin.
Well, John, I'm sure we will be talking inflation again on the programme shortly, but let's discuss Apple instead, unfortunately, perhaps. So Apple's the subject of an antitrust probe by Germany, or is going to be.
Yeah. I know. This is the fourth big U.S. corporation that the Germans have been going after. Google, Facebook and Amazon are the other three. And this is coming out of the Federal Cartel Office in Germany. And basically, they're looking at a sort of antitrust issue involving the iPhone and the App Store. They're looking at the iOS operating system and the App Store, the sort of ecosystem around the phone and the store, and whether or not in several markets it is knocking out competition. Now, you know, I don't want to be rude to the German people or to the Federal Cartel Office, but I have news for them. Nobody cares here. I mean, seriously, they just don't care about this. In Washington, D.C. and here on Wall Street, it's just simply nothing that they worry about. And that is highlighted, I think, in the response that we've had today from Apple. Apple says the following. They say, we note that our operating system and our store and the company generally supports thousands of jobs in Germany. And they say, we look forward to discussing our approach with the Federal Cartel Office, having an open dialogue with any of their concerns. Well, you can read that two ways, Robin.
John, thanks very much indeed, as always. John Terrett there in New York.
You're watching CGTN. Coming up, vote counting is underway across Ethiopia against the backdrop of famine and allegations of war crimes.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge because of the high vaccination levels. The home of English rugby, Twickenham Football Stadium, is being turned into a mass vaccination centre.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas. Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh,
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Paul Barber and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. EU foreign ministers agree tough new sanctions on Belarus, promising that they're going to hurt.
Sweden seeks a new government after Prime Minister Stefan Löfven is ousted in a no-confidence vote.
And bad news for President Macron and for far-right leader Marine Le Pen as French regional elections see the revival of the traditional right.
China says it would welcome a visit to the Xinjiang Autonomous Region by the top United Nations human rights official as long as she comes with an open mind. Michelle Bachelet says she hopes to visit this year.
Separately, I continue to discuss with China modalities for a visit, including meaningful access to the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, and hope this can be achieved this year, particularly as reports of serious human rights violations continue to emerge.
In response, China's permanent mission to the UN in Geneva says that Xinjiang has realised stability and prosperity in recent years. It says all the allegations against its Xinjiang policies are politically motivated. The mission says while China welcomes the UNHCR's visit to Xinjiang, it should aim to promote communication and cooperation rather than find fault and reach a foregone guilty conclusion.
In Germany, the party of Angela Merkel has presented its political plan for the era after the Chancellor steps down. Christian Democrat leader Armin Laschet is promising to modernise Germany and become more aggressive in climate change policy. But he's also echoing comments by other world leaders regarding future relations with China. Ryan Thompson has more from Frankfurt.
There's just over 3 months until German voters head to the polls for a national election that will choose a new chancellor when Angela Merkel steps down. Merkel's party, the Christian Democratic Union, and its newly elected leader Armin Laschet are currently in the lead, and they're hoping to entice voters with a new manifesto. It calls for modernizing the nation through sustainability initiatives and a push to harness the power of technology. It's clear they're trying to court voters who may be interested in similar but more aggressive ideas from the Green Party, which has been polling neck and neck with the CDU. Armin Laschet also made headlines on Monday for coming down hard on German-China relations, just days after some leaders at the G7 took a similarly tough stance. In an interview with the Financial Times, Lachette warned of the dangers of a new Cold War against China and backed up comments from Chancellor Merkel that Beijing was as much a partner as a systemic rival. Lachette said Germany should never shy away from calling out critical issues that exist, but suggested that doing so should be done in diplomatic meetings and not on the world stage. Now, Lachette's position on German-China relations is in sharp contrast to that of the Green Party. They've said that they're eager to publicly challenge China's record on human rights. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
Scotland's hopes of progressing in the current Euro 2020 championship have suffered a major blow. Chelsea midfielder and Friday's man of the match against England, Billy Gilmour, has tested positive for COVID-19. That means he's out of the lineup for Scotland's match against Croatia on Tuesday. For more, let's cross to Rahul Pathak in Madrid. Rahul, what does this mean for Scotland and the tournament more generally?
Well, as you say, Paul, they're losing one of their best players, of course. He has to self-isolate now, Gilmour, and he won't play in that game. And if Scotland do go through, he won't be able to play in the last 16 match as well. Scotland have to win in that game if they have any chance of progressing. Now, interestingly, UEFA don't regard match play as close contact, so even though he was playing against England on Friday, and there were lots of shots of him with his arms around some of his Chelsea teammates after the game, the England team were all tested as well on Sunday and all given back negative tests. So at the moment it's business as usual. The player is self-isolating and UEFA say that nothing else should be happening after that.
So Billy Gilmour isn't the first player to test positive. What normally happens in cases like this?
So the player will self-isolate, and if he obviously constantly tested during that time, and if he returns a negative test at the end of that, in theory, he can rejoin the squad. But of course, this has happened with the Spain team, with Sergio Busquets, their captain, and Diego Llorente, and also with the Scotland team with Robert Fleck and several of the Swedish players. So after self-isolating, they can return if the team is still in the tournament, and they return a negative test. Now, in the case of Spain, the entire squad got vaccinated afterwards, but that was the decision taken by the Spanish government. And some are asking why the entire squad weren't vaccinated ahead of the tournament. UEFA have decided not to go down that route, and at the moment see no reason to change that.
OK, Rahul, thanks very much indeed for that. Rahul Pathak in Madrid.
Tokyo officials have announced that up to 10,000 domestic spectators will be allowed into Olympic venues, despite expert calls for stadiums to be empty. Shouting by spectators will also be banned, with the rules to be reviewed on July the 12th. Phoebe Amoroso reports.
The key word here is very much one of flexibility, and if the COVID-19 situation is to change in Japan, those restrictions will change. In particular, the organisers said that if there is a state of emergency or other priority measures, as they're called, are implemented on July the 12th, they will look to scaling those numbers back further. But one key issue that came up in the press conference was one of stakeholders. These are counted as a separately from spectators. And so there were reports that for the opening ceremony, there would be 20,000 people in attendance. So 10,000 would be spectators and presumably 10,000 would be stakeholders. But we heard from Tokyo 2020 CEO Muto that he expects that number will be reduced. They're still discussing what to do on that front. We've seen new measure after new measure in order to really try and ramp up the safety and security. First of all, the number of officials coming into Japan has been greatly reduced. Originally, 180,000 officials were scheduled to come into the country. That was reduced to 78,000, then 53,000. Also, IOC has been providing vaccines for athletes. IOC's Thomas Bach has said that now well over 80% of the residents of the Olympic Village are expected to be vaccinated. And when it comes to media, this is separate from that, but he expects that 70 to 80% will be vaccinated. They've also released the 3rd edition of the playbook, and this is where they've made clear that rule breakers will face consequences. There will be sanctions for people who do not follow the safety guidelines on that front, and that could include loss of accreditation or financial sanctions. But of course, now that they've decided to hold the games with spectators, there have to be rules for spectators as well. This will involve mask wearing and travelling directly to the venue, not lingering, and travelling back as quickly as possible, really trying to reduce the movement of people. Of course, if the COVID-19 situation changes in Japan, we can expect these rules to also be updated.
Phoebe Amoroso in Tokyo there. The World Health Organization has announced plans for a vaccine manufacturing hub based in South Africa to supply the African continent. The number of reported cases and deaths from COVID-19 has risen by almost 40% across Africa in the past week. Meanwhile, China's ambassador to the UN in Geneva has urged countries to work together in fighting the pandemic. He called upon countries to increase their vaccine production, double down on efforts to help developing countries make vaccines locally, and waive the intellectual property rights for COVID-19 vaccines.
Voting has now finished in the Ethiopian general election. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed rose to power in 2018, promising a democratic revival in Africa's second most populous country. But his government has faced criticism over famine and allegations of war crimes in the northern region of Tigray. CGTN's Gurum Chala is following this story from the country's capital, and he joins us now from Addis Ababa. So, Gurum, how has today gone, and when are we expecting a result?
Well, more than 38.2 million people have been registered to vote in the Ethiopian national elections, and this is the sixth round, by the way. And millions are out on the streets of the capital city, Addis Ababa, and also in 48,000 polling stations across the country, casting their votes. And so far, so good. According to the National Electoral Board of the country, the report suggests that there is no major report that has been, getting to it, except that there were some few delays when it comes to the time that it's supposed to start. But then again, these delays will be fixed by extending the voting time. And the story that we have just heard from them is that voting time now is extended till 9 p.m. local time. That is an extension of an extra 3 hours to compensate some of the hiccups when it comes to timing. But so far, so good. It's very secure, and we have to wait and see what's going to happen in the next few hours. But we can confirm that the Ethiopian national elections is going very well. But when it comes to results, they have said that after voting is concluded, they should be announcing that right away, and they'll be posted in every polling station. But the general election results will be announced in a few days' time.
And when it comes to the issues that matter to voters, the government's faced criticism over what's happening in the Tigray region. How important has that been?
As you remember, the law enforcement mission in the Tigray regional state has been concluded. That's according to the government. And there were a few pocket areas that they need to work on to bring security back to that regional state. The provisional administration there is now working to provide government services and also generally to provide humanitarian services for the people there. This is really a concerning matter. But as you know, in the Tigray regional state, there is no election at the moment. It's been scheduled perhaps for the coming September. But in general terms, we can say that people here wish the best for that regional state, as this is part of the country. But this general election, if held peacefully and the result can be announced and a government can be formed, then it is also going to contribute for re-establishment, reconstruction of the Tigray regional state. So it is very critical that Ethiopia says this general election peacefully, and the result is going to also determine what is going to happen when it comes to also supporting humanitarian relief services in the Tigray regional state. But so far, that insecurity is not really affecting the election in other parts of the country.
Gurum Chala in Addis Ababa, many thanks.
Armenia's Prime Minister has won a snap election. Nikol Pashinyan actually boosted his control of the country's parliament, taking nearly 54% of the votes. In second place was the Armenia Alliance Party, led by a former president. He's already questioned the credibility of the result. The election was meant to end a political crisis sparked by the loss of territory in Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez was heckled by a Catalan separatist protester as he announced plans to pardon 9 jailed Catalan independence leaders. The move is a bid to end the conflict between the wealthy Catalan region and the rest of the country. But some Catalan activists say a pardon over the failed independence bid of 2017 implies that the jailed leaders committed a crime, something they dispute.
The United States' new envoy for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea says he looks forward to a positive response if talks resume. Song Kim is in South Korea for a 5-day visit amid nuclear talks with Pyongyang. Over the weekend, Kim Jong-un urged preparation for both dialogue and confrontation with the United States. Joe Biden's administration says solutions must be found to induce Pyongyang to give up its nuclear weapons.
Dongguan is the latest city in southern China to report new COVID-19 cases. The manufacturing hub has launched a massive testing program after 2 new cases were reported, both of the Delta variant. Authorities have asked residents not to leave the city except for essential reasons.
India gave out a record 7.5 million COVID vaccine doses on Monday under a campaign to inoculate all adults for free. It follows a chaotic vaccine rollout which worsened a second wave that killed hundreds of thousands. Earlier this month, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said the government would buy 75% of all vaccines from drug makers and distribute them to all states for free.
Also in India, coronavirus meant its International Yoga Day was less of a public affair than usual. It's part of a government campaign called Yoga and Indian Heritage. But the pandemic meant that ancient heritage was confined to people's houses rather than the large gatherings of previous years.
And a diamond rush in South Africa has lost its sparkle, with gemstones turning out to be ordinary quartz crystals. Thousands have flocked to a hillside in the east of the country over the past week to dig for mysterious stones thought to be diamonds. But scientific tests proved otherwise, dashing the dreams of the disappointed diggers who've been hoping to find their fortune.
It's been described as the darkest day of the year so far in France. A freak supercell weather storm brought floods and lightning to the north of the country late on Saturday. The French weather agency says over 40,000 separate lightning strikes were recorded in the region around Amiens. To see the pictures, go to europe.cgtn.com. And remember that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Now, 16 months after Brazil recorded its first COVID-19 case, the country has surpassed 500,000 deaths. It reported 2,300 more fatalities on Saturday and 82,000 new cases.
On Sunday, protesters critical of the government's handling of the pandemic staged a ceremony on Rio's Copacabana beach to honour those who have lost their lives. Lucrecia Franco reports.
Red roses, a tribute to the 500,000 lives lost to COVID-19, laid in the sand of Rio de Janeiro's famous Copacabana beach. 500 in all, each representing 1,000 deaths to mark the grim milestone of Brazil's pandemic death toll.
This is the result of a government who has disrespected every sanitary measure and sought to relax mask wearing. It's madness.
As it approached the tragic mark on Saturday, thousands of people across Brazil took to the streets to protest President Jair Bolsonaro's response to the pandemic. Brazil has posted over 2,000 deaths per day in the past week, and numbers are rising as the country enters the winter season. Many Brazilians are placing the blame for this high mortality rate on the example set by President Bolsonaro, whose government is being investigated for the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. The ongoing congressional inquiry has focused on government failures to secure vaccines and its promotion of unproven treatments, such as chloroquine. To date, less than 12% of the population has been fully immunized in Brazil, which ranks second only to the United States in total number of COVID-19 deaths. Epidemiologist Roberto Medronho says Brazil is likely to surpass the United States, if it hasn't already, due to underreporting.
Reaching 500,000 is not exactly accurate, because it is more likely that the COVID-19 death toll in Brazil is close to 600,000 due to the lack of verification, and above all because there has never been a national plan to fight the pandemic.
In the meantime, Bolsonaro welcomed the Copa America football tournament, where more than 80 people have tested positive so far, including players and staff, with 2 more weeks of play still ahead.
From the beginning, I have said about the pandemic one thing. I regret the deaths, but we have to live.
But on the beach this day, a floral reminder of COVID-19's terrible toll on Brazil, what many health experts say is a consequence of science denial. Lucrecia Franco, CGTN, Rio de Janeiro.
Still ahead on Global Business Europe.
How many guests can you have? Can you dance? What about the buffet? Find out what the latest lockdown rules mean for brides and grooms-to-be.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. While lifting UK lockdown measures completely is on pause, weddings are now able to go ahead with no fixed size limit, providing social distancing is observed.
But couples and event planners are still frustrated. Testing and vaccination status can't be used to open up weddings in the same way that football matches can be. Juliet Mann reports.
If you're thinking this is anything but a frazzled bride-to-be, you'd be right. As an events planner, she's accustomed to settling clients' nerves. Good practice then for managing expectations of her own big day.
So we were supposed to get married in August last year, then we moved it to July the 11th this year, and then we're now trying to work out what to do, and it looks like we're going to move it to October this year.
The UK's rules around nuptials still seem vague. They'll be allowed to go ahead with as many people as the venue permits. The couple can have the first dance and cut the cake. Guests have to be seated in groups no bigger than 6. What's not allowed is dancing indoors or stand-up receptions, and singing is strongly advised against.
To not have music and dance there kind of doesn't make any sense. And it's so important for the party spirit to get the party started. It's all about the music and entertainment. So that's why we've decided to hold out and just keep changing it until we get the party that we want.
Industry-wide, it's a struggle to understand the disparity in rules between weddings and larger sporting events.
In an ideal world, I would like the government to say, everything's open. Let's go full steam ahead. Let's get weddings back to its glory days. Because weddings, the revenue stream of weddings to the government is huge.
Revenue lost for every cancellation and postponement due to lockdown.
The wedding industry typically generates $20.5 billion in spending a year and provides work for around 400,000 people. From Toastmasters to waiting staff, from cake bakers to dressmakers, from florists to photographers.
The pandemic meant a huge amount of wedding business has been deferred, and adapting to be COVID safe is pricey. This boutique invested in new tech for remote appointments and had to build new storage.
I've got 280 plus extra dresses in this shop, what was never
intended to be here for the long time that they have been. So I've had a special storeroom made in the back of the shop to keep the dresses for anyone that's weddings have been postponed, because they have to be kept at a kind of regular temperature, no moistness, not in direct sunlight and things like that. It would be lovely to have the brides and their bride tribes coming back in. The feeling in here when you've got everybody all excited with a glass of fizz in your hands is just absolutely lovely, and we haven't had that exact moment for over a year and a half now, and that would be something that we as a team would love to have back in here.
But the limited changes in the rules for weddings mean that moment can't happen yet. Juliet Mann, CGTN, London.
The late Italian futurist artist Giacomo Balla was known for turning every inch of his home into a work of art. Now his vibrant residence in Rome has opened to the public for the first time. CGTN's Greg Lafredi takes a look at his creative world.
Nearly every detail of the kaleidoscopic home and studio of Giacomo Balla has been designed and created by the noted painter and sculptor. Inside, there is an explosion of colors, shapes, and geometries on the walls, ceilings, furniture, lamps, tiles, hanging clothes, and even the tools of his trade. Balla lived and worked in this apartment from 1929 until his death in 1958, together with his wife and 2 daughters.
The house was where the artist and his 2 daughters lived most of their lives. It was called a house of art, as they used to say at that time. Now we would call it a workshop house. In the house, they not only designed and drew, but also created their works, sometimes with the help of local craftsmen. There's a very real idea of seamlessness between life and art. They were totally identified with their artistic life, which is why we have to imagine that in this house, what for others was confined to the surface of the painting went beyond the frame onto the walls, onto the plates, and onto the clothes, because then they became sort of sculptures that traveled around the world.
The opening of Balla's home studio is accompanied by a complimentary exhibition at the Maxi Museum. Works by Balla, including drawings, objects, and sketches, are on display alongside works by contemporary artists.
We are opening after many, many years that it was closed and not visitable. The house where Giacomo Balla, his wife, and his daughters lived for many years, and it's more than a house. It's like a lab. It's like where his creative project really took shape, shaped itself. And while we were doing this, we realized how incredibly contemporary the idea, Giacomo Balla's idea of art was, as a total project, as a project where life and art were really coinciding. He designed everything in the house.
Casa Balla, From the House to the Universe and Back, curated by the Maxi Museum, runs until November 21st in Rome. Greg Lafredi, CGTN.
And finally, Stonehenge, a prehistoric monument in the south of England, traditionally attracts large crowds to mark the longest day of the year. But this year, police dispersed the traditional gathering on the summer solstice of June the 21st, amid concern the crowds were not observing social distancing. The UNESCO World Heritage Site serves as the main place of worship for the UK's pagan and Druid communities, which gather to watch the sunrise. Those attending had scaled the perimeter fences in the early hours. However, they were not to be rewarded with a sunrise over the monument due to the heavy cloud cover.
Our main headline again. EU foreign ministers agree tough new sanctions on Belarus, promising that they're going to hurt.
And that is Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
Up next on CGTN Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From us and the rest of the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.